What is up, YouTube? My name is Dead Mewtwo, and today's video is super important because today's video will start a short series on my channel where I rip open my bag of secrets and I give you all my steps to winning more battles and going on longer win streaks in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Because I'm starting this short series, this video is going to be a little bit more oriented around the beginning steps and getting started with a successful strategy so that you can apply these tips to your battles going forward. We're going to be talking about how to pick a winning Pokemon, discuss important deck building decisions, and discuss meta deck builds and why they are meta. So just before we get into the video, I want to take an opportunity to really appreciate my audience. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for all the support you've been showing me. And if you're new here to the channel, go ahead and give the video a like. Comment down there and let me know if this video was helpful for you, and to subscribe for more content like this. I'm super excited about this series, so let's go ahead and get into part 1. So taking a look at one of my favorite Pokemon here, Mewtwo, this is just an example card. So we're going to be covering a couple of different ways to digest the information that you can find on a Pokemon card, mainly taking a look at these areas. So let's start from the top and work our way down. One of the things to definitely consider whether it should be an inclusion or not is how much HP this Pokemon has. There are some HP thresholds that I will describe as breakpoint thresholds that you should try to consider and think about if it's valuable enough to include in your deck. Now, a little bit more important than that is what energy type are you going to be using? There are several to choose from, and they all have their counterpart weakness. Some within their categories aren't the same as others, but that's because there are subcategories within Pokemon types. That's something we're not going to be getting into today. But if that's something that you do want to know more about, let me know down in the comment section. I'd be happy to make a video on that. Now moving on, what are the energy requirements of the attack of the Pokemon that you want to use? Some Pokemon have a really high energy cost requirement, and that can make it hard to use them on a consistent basis in the way that you might want to. Some strategies do have energy supplements, and by supplement, I mean that you're able to apply more than just one energy from your energy zone. For example, a Misty, a Brock, or the new mythical island Execute. These are all examples of ways to be able to apply more than just one energy in your turn. Most of them require you to use a supporter card. Some, like Execute, require you to attack. Now, how much damage does the attack do? And that's something that you also need to take into consideration when selecting which Pokemon is going to be your effective Pokemon in your deck. Just like selecting a Pokemon for a specific energy type, you are going to have to prepare against its weakness, and that's displayed here. Almost just as important as how much does the attack cost on your Pokemon, how much does the retreat cost? Now, unlike your attack cost, retreat costs are non-energy specific. While this is very basic information, it's the foundation for which we build the rest of our deck building theories on. Now, with all of that card data, I'm going to introduce just a very simple way how to think about what to value in a Pokemon and what not to. First on the list is you get 1 point if your HP is above the breakpoint threshold. Now, I think that there are several breakpoints throughout the game, so I'll mention just a couple to keep in mind. If possible, you want to select basic Pokemon that have at least 60 HP. That's because a lot of Stage 1 Pokemon can one-shot a basic type Pokemon. While it's not always important to really plan against that, I always consider it to being a benefit to my deck build if I can follow this rule. Another breakpoint threshold to consider is about 130 HP, and that's because a lot of Stage 2 Pokemon can do 120 damage pretty easily, especially if you consider Giovanni being in the deck. I think that 160 HP is one to really consider as well, since Mewtwo can be a very powerful opponent. I do feel like that there are other breakpoint thresholds to consider, but just so that we can keep things nice and concise for now, I'm only going to mention those. I also consider another point to value is if your retreat cost is 2 or under, and that's because we can run things like X-Speed or Leaf to be able to rotate our bench and our active slot however we need throughout the battle, or if possibly we need to pay for that retreat cost with the energies from our turn. The next point is pretty self-explanatory, and that is I reward a point of value for having a useful ability. Examples of that would be like Greninja's Water Shuriken, Gengar's ability to stop supporter cards on your opponent's side, Superior doubling the grass type energies, Gardevoir awarding psychic energy to a psychic type Pokemon in the active slot, and Weezing's poison ability. These are all examples of Pokemon that have an extra ability instead of having just a basic attack for damage. I also like to award a point of value for being able to one-hit kill a Pokemon in a single attack. This is usually an attack that does at least 120 damage, similar to having that high damage attack. I think that having an effective low cost attack is also very valuable. I like to consider Pokemon like Starmie EX, Pikachu EX or Articuno EX, all of these Pokemon have about an 80 to a 90 attack, and most of them require only 2 energies to attack with. I think that there's probably more than just these 5 ways to award points of value to a Pokemon or not, but these are the ones that I formulated a lot of my deck lists around and have proven to be very successful for me throughout all of the PvP events in Pokemon Pocket. And so because we're going to be prioritizing win streaks and wins in our deck builds, we want to shoot for about 3 points of value from every card if we can. And in today's video, I'm going to be referencing these points while I compare and contrast a few different Pokemon. And first on the list, those Pokemon are Kangaskhan versus Lickitung. I think these Pokemon got a lot of love in the early game of Pokemon Pocket, but as of late, things like Druddigon have kind of outperformed them because the slot these Pokemon filled so well was being a good wall while being able to output some damage. Druddigon does that passively just by sitting in the active slot rather than actually having to place energies on it and worry about a 3 energy cost retreat. First, let's talk about Kangaskhan. So as a basic, Kangaskhan has 100 HP, which is already above our breakpoint threshold. We like that. That's going to get 1 point there. And he has a 1 energy cost attack that can seriously wreck an opponent with some lucky coin flips. I couldn't tell you how many times games can be ended just because Kangaskhan flips 2 heads and does 60 damage to only 1 basic type on your opponent's side. It's pretty great. However, that outcome is only possible by being able to flip 2 heads when it comes time to attack. I feel like the biggest redeeming quality to that is that it only takes 1 energy to go ahead and attack this way, but some of the downfalls are the fact that its retreat costs are 3. So after that evaluation, I think that Kangaskhan has 1 solid point with the possibility of having 2 if they flip lucky on the coin flips. Taking a look at Lickitung, I think Lickitung has a very similar analysis because just like Kangaskhan, Lickitung has about 1 point of value with the potential of having 2. Mainly, it gets the 1 point from having the 90 HP, and I think that the continuous lick attack is something to really consider because the ceiling potential of that attack is extremely high. Oftentimes, I've swung for 180 very easily with Lickitung, but just as easily, I've also swung for 0 with Lickitung. And because Lickitung's attack costs 3 to use, it takes time to build it up. And during that time, I might also have other Pokemon that are just as valuable, if not more valuable, by the time that I have to fill Lickitung's energy and flip those coins. I would say that just looking at these 2 cards side to side, Kangaskhan still has a slight edge for me, being that it has 10 extra HP and its energy requirements to attack are significantly less. As a tip to consider going for consistent winning game plans, I like to not leverage coin flips just because those coin flips really can backfire. I think coin flips in this game are fantastic for when you want to introduce a little bit of extra fun and have some explosive plays. Next on the list, we've got Chatot and Meowth. Just like Kangaskhan and Lickitung, I feel like these 2 cards are very similar, however, they have different value curves. When looking at Chatot, I think that Chatot has 3 points of value. That's because Chatot has 60 HP, Chatot has a 1 energy cost retreat, and Chatot has potentially the most powerful draw power in the game with its mimic attack. I couldn't tell you how many times Chatot has saved the game for me just because I'm able to copy my opponent's hand size while refreshing my hand size, and doing that a couple of turns in a row can really set you ahead of your opponent in ways that you really can't imagine otherwise. Similar to Chatot, but before Chatot was Meowth, and Meowth also has about 3 points of value, so let's dive into that. Meowth has also 60 HP, and also 1 energy cost attack that draws you a card, and does 10 damage. When comparing and contrasting these 2 cards together, I think that there are times where you can value Meowth over Chatot, depending on if you feel like drawing a card is more important than also recycling your hand, and depending on how many cards you also might need to be drawing up with your deck strategy. An example where I feel like Chatot has the elevated value is in my Pidgeot deck, because it also plays a little bit of a pseudo strategy for when my opponent sees me having a Pidgey and considers holding more cards in their hand so that I can use Chatot and possibly punish that decision. An example where I feel like Meowth has been a little bit more valuable for me was with a Mewtwo build that I had at one point. Meowth was an excellent wall while I was able to chip damage on my opponent's Pokemon and draw up my evolutions for a Gardevoir or a Mewtwo or whatever I would need to be able to move my game plan forward. In most of my decks, I have replaced the Meowth with the Chatot, but I absolutely feel like that there are times where a Meowth is more valuable to me. Now, last but not least, we have Weezing from Genetic Apex and Weezing from Mythical Island. I think this is a bit more of an interesting choice to enlist in your deck building decisions if you're going to choose to use a Weezing, because depending on your strategy, one might definitely be better for you than the other. When looking at the Weezing from Genetic Apex, in brief, I valued this Pokemon at 2 points of value. Weezing from Genetic Apex has the passive ability Gas Leak, and that allows you to poison your opponent's active spot Pokemon without having to attack at your end phase. We like that, and that's going to get us a point there. Weezing can also be pulled off the active slot with the supporter card Koga, and that kind of flexibility is really awesome. The only other Pokemon that might be as flexible as that in this way is Mew EX. Because of this utility, we're also going to get a point for that. Looking at the Mythical Island Wheezing, I think this Wheezing has at least 1 point of value with the potential of it having 2. And that's because this Wheezing can also be pulled off the bench by a Koga, but when you build up the attack on this Wheezing, you have the ability to circumvent any damage that would be dealt to you on your opponent's turn. However, the latter bit of information there is completely dependent on a coin flip and flipping heads. Personally, I think if I were choosing between these two Wheezing, I would choose the one that does the poison damage because it's a little bit more upfront. Not only is it a question that I'm asking my opponent of how can you deal with this poison damage, when I also use the tackle attack, if my opponent chose to keep their Pokemon in the active slot, by the end of my opponent's turn, I will have done 50 damage, equating to the same damage of the other Wheezing. And while that's dependent on the way that I value the strategy of Wheezing, I love the fact that there are multiple facets and ways to approach this Pokemon and how you include it into your deck. So I really hope after comparing and contrasting some of these Pokemon, you understand the point system a little bit better and are able to apply it in your own deck building strategies. So I think some of the things that are very important to include in your deck are going to be some of the proven staples. And so first on the list is going to be Professor's Research. Now, Chatot aside possibly giving you 3 or 4 cards, Professor's Research gives you 2 cards immediately without having to attack. I think that this is the second most powerful draw power, and arguably the first, depending on how you really consider Chatot or using a supporter card. Similar to Professor's Research, we've got Pokeball. Now, Pokeball is a tutor and it targets specifically a basic type Pokemon. Depending on how many different basic Pokemon are in your deck, it's going to grab one of those. Now, getting a little bit spicy here, Sabrina wins games. I don't know how many times I have to say it, but Sabrina wins games. And anytime I can't include a Sabrina in my deck, I do feel like I'm missing something. I don't think you need to have 2 Sabrinas in your deck. I think you need to have at least 1, but the variance of having up to 2 provides you just a little bit of extra utility and possible disruption. Sabrina wins games because you're able to force your opponent to decide which Pokemon from the bench they're going to put on their active slot, and sometimes they don't actually get to decide. They only have 1 Pokemon on their bench, and so that decision can be punished a little bit for your benefit. One thing I will say about Sabrina is I do only like to use her whenever I'm going to guarantee knocking out one of my opponent's Pokemon. Like I had said about the disruption, you can also use Sabrina to slow your opponent down or force your opponent to use a Leaf or an X-Speed to reorient their active slot for the Pokemon that they wish to have. Similar to Sabrina, we have Giovanni. Now Giovanni also, you can run this in 1 or 2, and just like Sabrina, if I'm not able to actually have this in my deck, there's always a time or a chance where I feel like that extra 10 would have really secured me the win here, and so I always try to find space in the deck for a Giovanni. So we've talked about the fact that we must include 2 Professor's Research, 2 Pokeballs, and if we can, at least 1 or 2 Sabrinas or 1 or 2 Giovannis here. And so we're looking at about 4 to 8 different cards in our deck already being allocated as just staples. And so you might be asking yourself, how many Pokemon do I run? To answer that question, I would say about 50% of your deck should be Pokemon and 50% of your deck should be items and supported cards. And so to further define that ratio, I think that 4 to 6 of your cards in your deck should be basic type Pokemon. That means that you have at least 2 stage 1 lines or 2 stage 2 lines in your deck with the possibility of some extra flavor here and there. I think that you should have about 2 to 4 stage 1 Pokemon in your deck, which is to build on the 4 to 6 basic type that you have in your deck. And as far as stage 2 Pokemon, I think that you should have about 2 to 3 in your deck, which means that we're usually not running more than 2 full stage 2 lines. I think that limiting yourself to this thought process is contributing to the most successful win ratios for me, but all of this is subject to change as the game develops and as new cards and Pokemon are introduced. I'll say that anytime my opponent doesn't follow these rules, I find that my games are a little bit easier facing them. And so again, you might be asking yourself, that's 8 to 11 Pokemon and 4 to 8 staples. So now what? Now it's time to support your strategy through and through. We have about 12 to 19 slots occupied in our deck already by our Pokemon and staples. We still need to fill those 1 to 8 slots with any other item and supporter cards that are going to push our game plan forward. Let's take a look at some of those options. Some examples of things you're going to want to consider is if your retreat costs are particularly low, you can use X-Speed or Leaf to be able to expedite some things. Or if you're running a grass type deck, Erica fits in fantastically. Most of the time I'll try to throw a potion in there because 20 HP does mean a lot sometimes. And new to the selection is a Pokeflute, which pairs excellently with Giovanni and Sabrina. And if you're running a water deck, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't want to put Misty in there. These are all examples of cards that really support a game plan, maybe more specifically like Koga, or just your ability to stay alive longer like Erica. It's these types of cards that you're going to fill that 1 to 8 slots in your deck with. And so one thing that's really going to help bring home a lot of these points that we've talked about today is if we discuss some of the most meta decks and what makes them meta. First on the list, and I think possibly one of the most dominant decks in the meta right now, is Mewtwo. Now, Mewtwo did get a little bit of love here in Mythical Island with the addition of Mew EX and the Mythical Slab, but let's take a look at some of the other deck building decisions here. So first, we're following the format of only having 5 basic type Pokemon. We have the 2 Ralts, the 2 Mewtwo EX, and the Mew EX. And following that format, we only have 2 Stage 1 Pokemon, and that's Carlia. Finishing the format, we have Gardevoir. And so in total, we have 9 different Pokemon, 5 basic types, 2 Stage 1, and 2 Stage 2. This is a little bit lower than 50-50, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that because we have things like Mythical Slab, Pokeball, and Professor's Research. I don't think we have anything to worry about when it comes to draw power here. As a creative choice, I could say that swapping a Sabrina for a Giovanni for that extra utility would be useful here, but I think it's a very smart choice to have a Leaf and an X-Speed just in case you have to retreat a Gardevoir or that Mewtwo, and you don't have to worry about the retreat costs. And I think that it's very evident why Mewtwo has been so strong for such a long time. Moving forward, we're going to look at a Gyarados deck. And while Gyarados being meta is a bit of a controversial topic that I'm not going to get into today, I think that the explosive power and the consistency that Gyarados brings to the table is something that truly forms water into the archetype and power fantasy that it is. Let's take a look at the Pokemon ratios here real quick. So we've got 2 Froakie, 2 Magikarp, and 2 Druddigon as our basics, matching the 4 to 6 numbers we're trying to hit. We have 2 Frogadier and 2 Gyarados, matching the stage 1 ratios that we want to hit. And then we only have 2 Greninja in this deck, which completes the Pokemon ratios that we want to hit. Now, unlike the Mewtwo deck, the Gyarados deck does seem to be a bit Pokemon heavy, but I think that's also because Gyarados plays a little bit of a stalling game plan to be able to harness its true power. However, also taking a look here, we did not miss out on the Pokeballs or the Professor's Research, but we did choose not to bring in the Sabrina or the Giovanni in lieu of the Leaf here, which I feel like is a very negotiable decision. I don't think that Leafs are absolutely necessary in this deck, but with the fact of knowing that we're running Druddigons and that Gyarados has a retreat cost of 3, Leaf does have its utility in this deck. I couldn't tell you how many times I've been rolled over by this deck though, just because of Misty. All right, cranking through the next one here, we've got a Celebi EX, and this deck was brought to us by Mythical Island. I think that Celebi being able to be considered as a meta option has done wonders for the game, and that's because it's a grass type. If there's a strong grass type, that means that there can be a strong fire type, and that means that there can be a strong water type, which does kind of come back to full circle for being Pikachu, but I do think that Celebi EX is a welcome addition in the top performing decks. One of the things that I'll say about Celebi is I think that Celebi plays very similar to Mewtwo. I just think that where Celebi diverges from Mewtwo is in the inclusion of different types of supporters. And so in this Celebi deck, we have 2 Celebi, 2 Snivy, and 1 Delmise. And so that's going to fit the formula of 4 to 5 basic types. And we also have 2 Servine, which is going to fit the formula for the stage 1s, followed by the 2 Superior, which is going to complete the formula here. Now, knowing the Celebi game plan a little bit, the Ericas are very important in being able to keep your grass types alive. And we absolutely did not miss out on the Pokeballs or the Professor's Researches here. There's not too much else to talk about when it comes to Celebi. The game plan here is pretty straightforward. You want to stall until you have Celebi with enough coin flips so that you can do some destructive damage, whether that's just manual energies or energies that you can double with Superior's ability. Now, last but not least on our list to evaluate here, we've got Pikachu EX. And seeing that we have focused a little bit harder on the Zebstrika and the Electabuzz gameplay, because inclusions like Druddigon or the strategy just to hide behind the wall have popped up a little bit more. I think that Zebstrika and Electabuzz are welcome additions to being able to combat that playstyle. All right. So dissecting the Pikachu EX deck, we've got exactly 6 basic Pokemon, 2 stage 1 Pokemon, and no stage 2 Pokemon. I think because of this fact, it's the reason why Pikachu EX is so consistent and aggressively dominant out there in your battles. We also have several of our staples like Sabrina, Pokeball, Professor's Research, and Giovanni included in this list. And while Pikachu has been out for quite a bit, I think that in general, the game plan when it comes to this deck is to fill your bench and attack with Pikachu as fast as you can so that you can close the gap on your opponent before they have time to set up. One creative choice I really like in this deck is the inclusion of Blue. I haven't found a whole lot of opportunities where Blue, I think, saves the game for me because what it basically does is it asks your opponent not to use the Giovanni they may have or to just gracefully survive by 10 HP. The latter scenario hasn't presented itself for me as much, and so I haven't found a true place for Blue to fit into my playstyle yet. However, if there is a deck out there that does leverage Blue's power, please point me in that direction because I'd love to be able to use that. Alrighty, so that pretty much wraps up part 1 of my Win More series. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like and let me know down there in the comment section which part was the most helpful for you. Thank you all again for being my audience. My name is Dead Mewtwo, and I want you to have a safe and blessed day. Bye-bye.